The voicemail came in on a Tuesday morning, while Laura was still in her robe, pouring her first cup of coffee. She almost didn't listen to it. She thought it was another sales call. But the voice on the message wasn't a stranger. It was old Mrs. Perkins, the neighbor who had lived next door to her mother for almost 30 years. And her voice was shaking. "Laura, honey," the message said. "There's a sold sign on your mama's house. A big red one, right on the front lawn. Did you know about this?" Laura set her coffee down so fast it splashed across the counter. She played the message again, then a third time. Her hands were cold. A sold sign. On her mother's house. The little house with the blue door. But that couldn't be right, because nobody had told Laura anything. Nobody had called. Nobody had asked. And Laura was the one person in this whole world who should have been asked first. That house wasn't just a house. That house was her mother. 2 hours later, Laura was in her car, driving the same roads she'd driven 1,000 times as a girl. Past the old gas station. Past the church with the crooked steeple. Past the diner, where her mom used to take her for pancakes on Sunday mornings. Her heart was pounding the whole way. And then she turned onto Maple Street. And she saw it. The sign was exactly like Mrs. Perkins said. Big, red, ugly. Stabbed right into the middle of the front yard her mother used to tend on her hands and knees every spring. Sold. Laura stopped the car in the middle of the street and just stared. She didn't cry. Not yet. She was too stunned to cry. She just looked at that little house. The white siding. The porch where she'd learned to walk. And the front door. That soft, pretty shade of blue her mother had painted by hand one summer, with a brush and a smile, and a glass of sweet tea sitting on the step beside her. "This is my favorite color in the whole world," her mama had said that day. Sky blue. Because no matter how bad things get, the sky is always still up there. Laura was maybe 10 years old when her mother said that. She was 43 now, and her mother had been gone for 3 years. Margaret. That was her mom's name. A soft-spoken woman with strong hands and a stronger heart. She'd raised Laura mostly on her own. And even at the very end, even when the cancer had taken almost everything from her, she'd held Laura's hand in that hospital bed and made her a promise. "This house will always be yours, baby," Margaret had whispered. "Don't you worry. I made sure of it. I made sure of it." Laura hadn't understood what her mother meant back then. She'd been too busy grieving to ask. And now those 5 little words came floating back to her, right there in the middle of Maple Street. I made sure of it. But if her mother had made sure of it, then how in the world was there a sold sign on the lawn? Laura finally parked. She got out slow. Her legs felt heavy walking up that path. And that's when a big moving truck came rumbling around the corner and pulled up right in front of the house. Laura froze. 2 men climbed out. They opened the back of the truck, and they started carrying boxes into the house. Somebody's couch, somebody's lamps, somebody else's whole life, going in through her mother's blue door. "Excuse me," Laura called out. "Excuse me, who told you that you could?" One of the movers just shrugged. "Ask the new owners, lady. We just carry the boxes." New owners. The words hit Laura like cold water. She stood on the sidewalk, watching strangers move into the only home she had left of her mother. And she still didn't understand how any of this had happened. Because here's what you need to know. When Margaret died, Laura's father was still alive. And within a year, barely a year, he had remarried. A woman named Diane. Diane was, well, Laura tried to be kind about her. She really did. But Diane had never once felt like family. She was cold in a way that was hard to explain. Polite to your face. Distant behind your back. She moved into Margaret's house, slept in Margaret's bedroom, and slowly, quietly, made every trace of Margaret disappear. The photos came down. The garden went to weeds. And then, a few months ago, Laura's father passed away too. Laura had grieved him. She had. But she'd also thought, at least now, maybe, things with Diane would settle. At least now the family could breathe. She never imagined Diane would do this. Standing on that sidewalk, Laura pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and called her stepmother. Diane answered on the 4th ring.
Calm. Cool.
Like she'd been expecting it. Diane, Laura said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm standing in front of Mom's house.
There's a sold sign.
There are people moving in. What did you do? There was a long pause on the other end. Then Diane spoke, and her voice was flat as a stone. I sold it, Laura. It's done. You sold it? Without telling me? That was my mother's house. It was your father's house, Diane said. And when your father passed, it came to me. So it was mine to sell. I don't need your permission, Laura. It's already closed. The money's already in the bank. Laura could barely breathe. Mom promised me that house. She promised me. Diane let out a small, tired sigh, like Laura was a child throwing a fit. Well, she said, your mother's gone, honey. And promises don't mean much when your name isn't on the paper. The house was never really yours. Move on. And then click. She hung up.
Just like that.
Laura stood there in the road, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. The movers laughed about something behind her. A dog barked somewhere down the street. And the blue door, her mother's beautiful blue door, swung shut as another stranger carried another box inside. I want you to stop for just a second and think about that. Imagine losing your mother, then losing your father. And then, while you're still grieving, someone quietly sells the last piece of your family you have left and tells you to move on. If that ever happened to your family, I'd love for you to tell me in the comments what you would do. Because a lot of folks in Laura's shoes would have just gone home and cried, given up, let it go. But Laura didn't drive home. She stood there a long moment. And then, very quietly, almost too quietly to hear, she said something to herself. We'll see about that. Because Diane had said one thing on that phone call that Laura couldn't stop thinking about. One little sentence that didn't sit right. Asterisk, the house was never really yours. Asterisk. And in the back of Laura's mind, her mother's voice whispered again, soft and sure and steady. Asterisk, I made sure of it, baby. Underscore. Underscore, I made sure of it. Asterisk. What had Margaret done all those years ago that even Diane didn't know about? And why was Laura suddenly so certain that her stepmother had just made the biggest mistake of her life? Laura didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until almost 3 a.m, staring at an old photograph. It was a picture of her mother, kneeling in front of that little house, dirt on her hands, laughing at something off camera. The blue door was right behind her. And every time Laura looked at it, one thing kept turning over in her mind. I made sure of it. Her mother wasn't a careless woman. Margaret balanced her checkbook to the penny. She kept every receipt in a shoebox. She was not the kind of person who made a promise she couldn't keep. So if she said she made sure of it, she meant something. Laura just didn't know what. By morning, she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to sit at home and cry. She was going to look Diane in the eye and get the truth. So she drove across town to the fancy new apartment complex where Diane had moved after selling the house. And that alone told Laura something. Because Diane had gone from Margaret's simple little home to a shiny place with a fountain out front and a fancy gate. New money. Fresh money. The kind of money you get when you sell a house behind someone's back. Laura knocked. Diane opened the door in a silk robe, holding a coffee mug, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. For a second, Diane looked almost surprised. Then that cold, calm mask slid right back over her face. Laura, she said, I figured you might show up. She didn't invite her in, but Laura stepped inside anyway. And what Laura saw made her stomach turn. There were suitcases by the door. Brand new luggage, tags still on. A travel brochure sat open on the counter. A cruise. Somewhere warm, somewhere with beaches. And on Diane's wrist was a gold bracelet Laura had never seen before, catching the morning light. Her mother's house.
Sold.
And turned into a cruise and a bracelet. You're going on vacation, Laura said quietly. Diane sipped her coffee. I've earned a little rest. That was my mother's home, Diane. And you turned it into this. Diane set the mug down with a little clink. Let me explain something to you, honey, so you stop showing up at my door. When your daddy and I got married, that house became ours. When he passed, it became mine. Every bit of it. And a widow has every right to sell what belongs to her. That's just the law. You didn't even tell me, Laura said. Her voice cracked. You didn't give me one single chance to say goodbye to it, to get Mom's things. And that's when Diane said the thing that Laura would never forget. She shrugged. Just a little shrug, like it was nothing. There wasn't much left to get, she said. The new owners cleaned out the attic before they moved in. All that old junk up there, boxes, papers, whatever your mother left behind, they hauled it to the dump. The dump. Laura felt the floor tilt under her feet. Her mother's things. Her letters. Her photos. Her whole life. Thrown away like garbage. For a moment, Laura couldn't even speak. She just stood there, and the grief hit her so hard it felt like drowning. I'll be honest with you. This is the part of Laura's story that's the hardest to tell. Because losing a parent is one kind of pain. But watching a stranger throw away the last little pieces of them, like they never mattered at all, that's a different kind of pain entirely. If you've ever lost someone and had to fight just to keep a piece of them, you already understand what Laura felt in that room. And if you're with her right now, do me a favor and let her know in the comments. She's going to need people in her corner for what's coming. Because Laura didn't fall apart. Not in front of Diane. She took a slow breath. And then she started asking questions. Who bought it, she asked. Diane hesitated. Just for a second. Buyers. Nice people. What are their names? That's none of your business. But Laura kept pushing. And little by little, the story came out. The buyers weren't strangers at all. They were Diane's cousin, Rick, and his wife. Family. Diane's family. And the house had sold fast, way under what it was worth, in a quiet little cash deal that closed in under 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Laura's mind started working. Why the rush? Why sell your late husband's house to your own cousin, for cheap, in a hurry, before anyone even knew it was happening? Unless you didn't want anyone looking too closely. You sold it fast, Laura said slowly. Real fast. Almost like you didn't want to wait around. Something flickered in Diane's eyes. Just for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. I sold it because I wanted it done, Diane snapped. I don't want anything left of that woman and her sad little house. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to do. That woman. That's what she called Margaret. That woman. Laura walked to the door. But before she left, she turned around. And she asked one more question. A simple one, but it landed harder than Diane expected. Did you even read the paperwork, Diane? The old deed. Dad's will. Any of it. Did you actually read it? Or did you just sign whatever the lawyer put in front of you so you could get your money and run? Diane's face went still. And in that stillness, Laura saw it. The tiny crack. The flash of doubt. My lawyer handled everything, Diane said. But her voice wasn't so cold anymore. It was all done properly. Fast, but proper.
Fast.
There was that word again. Laura didn't say another thing. She just nodded and she walked out and she got in her car. And she sat there in that fancy parking lot with the fountain splashing away, and she let the tears come. Because she'd earned them. But somewhere in the middle of crying, she stopped. Because a memory had come back to her. Sharp and clear, like it had been waiting. Near the very end, when Margaret was sick, she'd had a locked green metal box. A little strong box, the kind you'd keep important papers in. And she'd been strange about it. She wouldn't let anyone touch it. Not Laura's father. Not anyone. And about 3 weeks before she passed, Margaret had asked a neighbor to drive her somewhere. She didn't say where. She'd been too weak to drive herself. She was gone for most of an afternoon. And when she came home, she looked settled, peaceful, like she'd finally taken care of something that had been weighing on her. Laura had never known where her mother went that day. But now, sitting in that parking lot, she suddenly needed to know more than she'd ever needed anything. Where did her mother go 3 weeks before she died? What was in that green box? And why, all of a sudden, did Laura feel like her mother had seen this whole thing coming, long before any of it ever happened? She wiped her eyes. She started the car. Mom, she whispered. What did you do? The next few days were the hardest Laura had known since the day she buried her mother. She tried to do things the right way, the smart way. She didn't want to fight dirty. She just wanted what was fair. So she started making calls. First, she called the new owners, Rick and his wife. She figured maybe, just maybe, they'd have a heart. Maybe they'd let her walk through the house one last time. Let her check the attic herself, before she believed her mother's things were really gone. Rick answered, and he was polite enough at first. But the second Laura asked to come by, his voice changed. "Look," he said, "we bought this place fair and square. We don't want any trouble. And honestly, Diane told us you might call and try to stir things up. So, I think it's best you don't come around here." Then, he hung up. Diane had gotten to them first. Of course she had. A day later, Laura drove back to Maple Street anyway. She couldn't help herself. She just wanted to see it one more time. But when she got there, something had changed. There were new locks on the door, shiny brass ones, and a little security camera blinking red pointed right at the front porch. At her mother's blue door, Laura sat in her car across the street and looked at that blinking red light. And she understood. She wasn't welcome here anymore. This place that raised her, this place that held every good memory she had, she was a stranger to it now. A trespasser. She had never felt so far away from her mother in her life. Next, Laura tried a lawyer. She scraped together what little money she had and made an appointment with an attorney downtown. She sat in his office and told him the whole story. The sold sign, the fast deal, Diane's cousin, the vacation, everything. The lawyer listened. He nodded. He took a few notes. And then he set down his pen and gave her a look she didn't like. "Mrs. Bennett," he said gently, "I'm real sorry for what you're going through. I am. But from what you're telling me on paper, it looks legal. Your father owned the home. He passed. It went to his wife. She sold it. Unless there's something we don't know about, there's no case here." "But my mother promised me," Laura said. She said she made sure of it. "A promise isn't a legal document," he said kindly. "Do you have anything in writing? A will from your mother? A deed with your name on it? Anything?" And Laura had to admit it. She didn't. Not that she'd ever found, anyway. "Then I have to be honest with you," the lawyer said. "You could spend thousands fighting this. Money you've told me you don't have. And you could still lose. My honest advice? Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is let go. Let go." There was that phrase again. The same thing Diane had said. The same thing the whole world seemed to be telling her. Asterisk, let it go, Laura. Move on, Laura. It's over, Laura. Asterisk. She thanked the lawyer. She walked out to her car. And that night, she hit the lowest point of the whole thing. Even her own family had started to turn. Her aunt called and told her to stop making waves. "Diane's grieving too, you know," she said. "Your daddy just passed. Don't go making this ugly. Have some respect. Have some respect." As if Laura was the one in the wrong. As if fighting for her own mother's memory was something shameful. Laura sat alone in her dark living room that night, and for the first time, she truly thought about quitting. She was tired. She was broke. She was out of friends, out of lawyers, out of hope. Everyone she trusted was telling her the same thing. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a grieving woman chasing something that was already gone. I want to pause right here for just a moment, because this is the part of the story where most people would have given up, and nobody would have blamed them. When you're grieving, and you're broke, and even your own family is telling you to stop, it takes something powerful to keep going. If you've ever had to keep fighting when everybody around you said to quit, then you already know how heavy that night felt for Laura. And if you're still rooting for her, go ahead and subscribe, because what she's about to find changes everything. Because here's the thing. That night, sitting in the dark, Laura wasn't just crying. She was remembering. She thought about that green metal box again, the one her mother guarded so carefully at the end. And something else floated up from the back of her mind, a small thing she'd forgotten for years. A birthday card. 2 or 3 years before Margaret got sick, she'd mailed Laura a birthday card. Nothing fancy, but inside it, taped to the paper, there had been a small key. A little brass key, the kind that fits a lockbox. And her mother had written just one line beside it, in her neat, careful handwriting. Asterisk for when you need it, baby. You'll know when. Asterisk. Laura remembered laughing about it back then. She'd thought her mother was just being sentimental. A spare house key, maybe, or a key to nothing at all. She'd tucked the card in a drawer and forgotten all about it.
But now
That line hit different. For when you need it. Laura shot up off the couch. She went digging through her drawers, her boxes, her old keepsakes, her hands shaking. She dumped out a whole shoebox of old cards and letters onto the floor. And there it was. The card. Faded now. A little bent at the corner. And taped inside, still there, after all these years, that small brass key. Laura held it up to the light and stared at it. Her heart was hammering.
a key.
But a key to what? The green box was gone. She had no idea where it went. Her mother had guarded it, then disappeared with it one afternoon, 3 weeks before she died, and it had never been seen again. Laura sat down on her floor, surrounded by old cards, holding that little key like it was made of gold. And she started to think back.
Hard.
Who had her mother trusted at the end?
Who drove her that day?
Where would she have taken something so important? And that's when Laura's phone rang. It was almost midnight. Nobody called at midnight. Laura looked at the screen. She didn't recognize the number at first. Then she did. It was a local number. An old one she hadn't seen in years. It was Mrs. Perkins, the neighbor, the same one who'd left that first shaking voicemail about the sold sign. Laura answered, her voice small. Hello. There was a pause on the line, and then old Mrs. Perkins spoke, slow and careful, like she'd been working up the courage to make this call for days. Laura, honey, she said. I'm sorry to call so late, but I've been carrying something, and I can't carry it anymore. What is it? Laura whispered. Your mama, Mrs. Perkins said. Before she passed, she left something with me, made me promise to keep it safe. And she told me to only give it to you if that house ever ended up in trouble. Laura's breath caught in her throat. I think, Mrs. Perkins said softly, that time is now. Laura barely slept that night either. But this time, it wasn't grief keeping her awake. It was hope. And she'd almost forgotten what that felt like. The next morning, she was on Mrs. Perkins' porch before the coffee was even cold. The old woman opened the door in her housecoat, her gray hair still pinned up from the night. She took one look at Laura's face and just nodded, like she understood. Come on in, honey, she said. I've got it ready for you. Laura stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Mrs. Perkins led her to the back room, moving slow on her cane. And there, sitting on a little table by the window, was the green metal box. Laura stopped breathing for a second. There it was. The same box her mother had guarded so fiercely at the very end. The box that had vanished 3 weeks before she died. It had been here all along, sitting safe in a neighbor's spare room, waiting. Your mama brought it over one afternoon, Mrs. Perkins said gently. She was so weak by then, I had to help her up the steps. She made me swear I'd keep it hidden. Said if I ever heard that house was being sold or fought over, I was to give this straight to you. Nobody else.
Just you.
Laura's hands were shaking as she reached into her purse. She pulled out the little brass key, the one from the birthday card, the one her mother had mailed her years before, with those words, for when you need it, baby. She slid it into the lock. It fit. Of course it fit. The lock clicked open, and Laura lifted the lid. And her eyes filled up right away. On top was a stack of photos. Her and her mom at the beach. Her mom in the garden. Her mom holding baby Laura on the porch of that little house, both of them squinting in the sun. Underneath the photos was a note in her mother's handwriting. Just a few words. Asterisk, I love you more than the whole sky, baby. Asterisk. Laura pressed that note to her chest and cried right there in Mrs. Perkins' back room. But there was more in the box. Because underneath the photos, underneath the memories, there was a thick folder. A legal folder. Official looking. And clipped to the front was a business card. The card read, Daniel Alvarez, estate attorney. Laura didn't understand. Her mother had never mentioned any lawyer. But that name, Alvarez, matched the return address on some papers inside the folder. And Laura suddenly remembered the afternoon her mother disappeared 3 weeks before she died. The mysterious trip. the neighbor who drove her. The way Margaret came home looking so settled, so at peace. She hadn't gone to say goodbye to an old friend. She'd gone to see a lawyer. Laura thanked Mrs. Perkins, hugged her tight, and drove straight to the address on that card, the green box sitting on her passenger seat like a passenger of its own. The law office was small, just a little place in a strip mall, tucked between a barber shop and a bakery. But when Laura walked in and showed the folder to the receptionist and said her mother's name, Margaret Bennett, the whole mood in the room changed. Within minutes, she was sitting across from Daniel Alvarez himself. He was an older man, kind eyes, gray at the temples. And when he opened that folder and looked at Laura, he smiled a slow, sad smile. "I always wondered if you'd come," he said. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. She sat right where you're sitting now, very sick, but sharp as a tack. And she was worried about one thing above all else." "What was that?" Laura asked. "She was worried," Alvarez said, "that after she was gone, somebody might try to take this house from you." Laura's heart started to pound. Alvarez pulled out a document. Thick. Official. Stamped and signed and notarized. He laid it on the desk in front of her and turned it around so she could read it. "Laura," he said, "your mother didn't just hope you'd get that house someday. She made it happen. Legally. Ironclad. 3 weeks before she passed, she came in here and she put that house into what's called a living trust." Laura shook her head slowly. I don't understand what that means." Alvarez leaned forward. He spoke gently, like he was explaining something to a friend. "It means the house was never really your father's to leave to anyone," he said. "Your mother owned that home. It came from her side of the family. And instead of just leaving it in a regular will, she set up a trust. That trust named you, Laura, as the true owner, the one and only owner." Laura's mouth went dry. But my dad lived there. After she died. He lived there for years." "He did," Alvarez nodded. "Because your mother, God bless her, had a kind heart. The trust let your father live in the house for the rest of his life. It was his home for as long as he needed it. But he never owned it. He couldn't sell it. He couldn't give it away. And the moment he passed," Alvarez tapped the paper, "the house became yours. Fully. Automatically. It never belonged to your father's estate at all. Which means it never belonged to Diane. Not for one single second." Laura sat there, stunned. The room was spinning a little. Her mother had seen it all coming. Somehow, that quiet, dying woman had looked into the future and known, that someone might try to take this house. And she had built a wall around it. A wall made of law and love. A wall with Laura's name on it. "I made sure of it, baby." That's what she'd meant. All this time. That's exactly what she'd meant. Laura finally found her voice. "So, Diane, she sold a house that was never hers." "That's exactly right," Alvarez said. And now his kind eyes went a little sharp. "She sold property she had no legal right to sell, which means that whole sale to her cousin, it isn't valid. We can undo it. The house comes back to you." I have to tell you, watching Laura sit there, everything shifting in a single moment, it's the kind of thing that gives you chills. Because for weeks, this woman had been told to give up, to let go, to move on. And the whole time, her mother's love had been sitting in a green box, waiting to save her. If that hits you the way it hits me, take a second and let Laura know in the comments that her mama did good. Because she surely did. But Alvarez wasn't finished. He folded his hands on the desk, and his face turned serious. "Now, Laura, I need to ask you something important," he said. "And how you answer changes everything." Laura leaned in. "What is it?" "When Diane sold that house," Alvarez said slowly, "did she have to sign paperwork? Legal documents, swearing that she was the rightful owner? Because in a cash sale like this, closing that fast, she almost certainly did." Laura thought about it. She remembered Diane's words. Asterisk, "My lawyer handled everything. Fast but proper. Asterisk." "I think so," Laura said. "Yes. She would have had to sign, wouldn't she?" Alvarez was quiet for a moment. Then he said the words that made Laura's blood run cold. "Then your stepmother didn't just make a mistake, Laura," he said. "If she signed papers swearing she owned that house, a house she had no right to. Then she committed fraud. Real fraud. The kind people don't just pay for with money. He slid a blank legal pad across the desk toward her. The question now, he said quietly, is how far you want to take this. Laura looked at that blank legal pad for a long time. Part of her wanted to be gentle. That was just her nature. Even after everything, some soft corner of her heart still whispered, she's family, don't make it ugly. But then she thought about the dump. About her mother's photos and letters hauled off like trash. About the blinking red camera pointed at that beautiful blue door. About being told to move on while a stranger slept in her mother's bedroom. And Laura picked up the pen. Let's do it right, she told Alvarez. All of it. Every step the law allows. Alvarez nodded slowly, like he'd been hoping she'd say exactly that. What happened next didn't happen overnight. Real justice rarely does. But it happened. And it started quiet, the way a storm starts quiet, just a little wind before everything comes down. The first thing Alvarez did was file the trust with the county. He made it official on the record, stamped and sealed. Margaret Bennett's living trust, naming her daughter Laura as the one true owner of the house on Maple Street. The second that paperwork hit the county records, something happened that Diane never saw coming. A cloud landed on the title. Now, if you've never bought or sold a house, let me explain that simply. When a house sells, there's a title company that makes sure everything is clean and legal before the money changes hands. It's supposed to protect everybody. And when Alvarez filed that trust, it was like a giant red flag went up over the whole sale. Because suddenly, the county records showed something impossible. The house had been sold by Diane, but the real owner, according to the trust, was Laura. 2 owners, 1 house, and only one of them had the legal right. The title company froze everything. Then the phone calls started. Rick, Diane's cousin, the buyer, got a call from his mortgage lender. And that call was not a friendly one. The lender had discovered the cloud on the title. They told Rick, in plain terms, that the person who sold him the house may not have had the right to sell it at all, which meant Rick might have handed over his money for a house he didn't actually own. The lender pulled out. Just like that. The loan was dead. Rick, in a panic, called Diane. And that's when the whole thing started to crack wide open. Because Diane, of course, had already spent the money. Laura found this out later, piece by piece. But here's how it went. Diane hadn't just bought a cruise and a gold bracelet. She'd used most of that house money to pay off her own debts. Old debts. Big ones. Turns out that was the real reason for the rush all along. Diane had been drowning in money troubles for years, and the second Laura's father passed, she saw that house as her way out. Her lottery ticket. Sell it fast, sell it quiet, pay off her mess, and sail away before anyone looked too close. That's why she sold to family. That's why she sold cheap. That's why she moved so fast. She never dreamed the house wasn't hers to sell. She never once checked the paperwork. And now the money was gone. The sale was falling apart, and her own cousin was calling her, furious, demanding to know what she'd done. I want you to just sit with that for a second, because this is the moment the whole thing turns. For weeks, Laura was the one getting doors slammed in her face. Now, all at once, it was Diane's world starting to come apart at the seams. And Diane still didn't even fully understand why. She was about to find out. Diane came storming into Alvarez's office 2 days later. Laura was there. She hadn't planned to be, but Alvarez had called her that morning and said, "You might want to come down here. I think she's coming." And she came. Diane burst through the door, face red, that cool mask completely gone now. "What is this?" she snapped, waving a letter from the title company. "What did you do, Laura? What kind of trick is this?" Laura didn't yell. She didn't have to. She just stood up, calm as still water, and she looked her stepmother right in the eye. "It's not a trick, Diane," she said quietly. "It's the truth. You want to see it?" Alvarez slid the trust document across the desk. Diane snatched it up, and Laura watched the color drain right out of her face as she read it. Line by line, her eyes darting back and forth, her hands starting to tremble. This can't be real," Diane whispered. "It's real," Alvarez said. "It's been real since 3 weeks before Margaret Bennett passed away. She owned that house. She left it to her daughter. Your late husband only had the right to live there. He never owned it. And that means neither did you. Diane's mouth opened.
Closed.
Opened again. Nothing came out. And then Laura said it. The words she'd been holding on to since the very beginning. She said them soft, almost kind, which somehow made them land even harder. You sold my mother's house behind my back, Diane, Laura said. You just never checked who really owned it. For a moment, the whole room was dead silent. Then Diane did what people like Diane always do when they're cornered. She got angry. She started shouting about how she was a widow, how she had rights, how she'd fight this in court, how Laura would be sorry. But Alvarez let her wear herself out. And when she finally ran out of steam, he said one more thing. Very calm, very quiet. Before you talk about court, Diane, there's something you should understand, he said. When you closed on that sale, you signed a seller's affidavit, a legal document, under oath, swearing that you were the rightful, lawful owner of that property. He paused. But you weren't, and you signed it anyway. Do you know what that's called? Diane's face had gone white as a sheet. That's not a lawsuit, Alvarez said. That's a crime. Diane stumbled back a step. She grabbed the edge of a chair to steady herself. The fight went right out of her. And for the first time, Laura saw real fear in her stepmother's eyes. Diane didn't shout after that. She just gathered her things with shaking hands and hurried out the door without another word. Laura stood there, feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness, exactly. Something deeper. Something like peace. Like her mother was standing right there beside her. If you've been with Laura through this whole journey, waiting for the moment things finally turned around, this was it. And I'd love for you to drop a comment right now and tell her you're proud of her, because she earned every bit of this. But the story wasn't over yet, because 3 days later, a letter arrived at Diane's fancy new apartment. She probably thought it was from Laura's lawyer. Another warning. Another threat. It wasn't. This letter had a government seal on the top. Official.
Cold.
The kind of envelope that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. It was from the county. And across the top, in bold black letters, were 4 words Diane never, ever expected to read. Notice of investigation, fraud. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Laura's life, because everything she'd been fighting for started coming true, one piece at a time.
Slow.
Steady.
Real.
First came the court date. Alvarez walked Laura through it every step of the way, and he told her the truth. A case like this, with a trust this solid, this clean, this ironclad, wasn't really much of a fight at all. Margaret Bennett had done her work well. Better than well. When the judge reviewed the trust, it took him about 10 minutes to make his ruling. The house on Maple Street belonged to Laura. It always had. The sale to Rick was declared void. Wiped clean, like it never happened. The house was hers. Laura sat in that courtroom, and when the judge said the words, she didn't cheer. She didn't cry out. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." So quiet that only she could hear it. But the house coming back was only half of it, because now the whole thing swung around onto Diane.
Hard.
Rick, the cousin who'd bought the house, was out his money and furious. And he wasn't furious at Laura anymore. He'd figured out the truth. He knew now that Diane had sold him a house she never owned. So Rick did what a lot of folks do when they've been cheated. He got himself a lawyer, and he came after Diane for every dollar he'd paid. And Diane didn't have it. That was the thing. She'd already spent it. The debts she'd paid off, the cruise, the bracelet, the fancy apartment. The money was gone. And now she owed all of it back, plus Rick's legal fees, plus penalties. Then came the county's fraud investigation. That seller's affidavit, the one Diane signed under oath, swearing she owned a house she didn't. That turned out to be exactly the crime Alvarez said it was. The investigators had the trust. They had the affidavit. They had the whole paper trail laid out plain as day. Diane's own lawyer told her the truth nobody wanted to say out loud. She was facing charges. Real ones. And if she wanted any mercy at all, she needed to settle everything, pay back everyone, and hope the court went easy. So that's what happened. To keep herself out of a jail cell, Diane was forced into a settlement that took everything she had left. The apartment with the fountain gone. The new car gone. Her savings gone. She had to sell the gold bracelet and cancel the cruise she'd bragged about. Every single thing she'd tried to steal from Margaret's memory, she lost. And then some. The woman who told Laura to move on ended up with nowhere left to move to. Now here's the part one think you'll appreciate most. Remember Laura's family? The aunt who called and told her to stop making waves? The relatives who said she should have some respect and let it go? Every one of them went quiet, because now they could see the truth of it. Laura hadn't been making trouble. Laura had been right the whole time. And a few of them, the ones with any decency left, called to apologize. Laura forgave them. That was just her way. But she didn't forget who stood beside her when it counted and who didn't. The person she never forgot was Mrs. Perkins. That sweet old neighbor who carried a secret for years just because a dying woman asked her to. Laura brought her flowers, brought her groceries, sat on her porch and drank sweet tea with her, the same way her mother used to. Some bonds, you see, are worth more than any house. And then came the day Laura had been waiting for through all of it. The day she got to go home. Alvarez met her at the little house on Maple Street with the new keys. The brass locks Diane's cousin had installed were still on the door. But now they were Laura's locks on Laura's door. Alvarez handed her the keys, patted her on the shoulder, and told her he'd give her a minute alone. Laura stood on that porch by herself. The porch where she'd learned to walk. And she looked at the blue door. Except it wasn't so blue anymore. Somewhere along the way, in all the buying and selling, somebody had started to paint over it. A dull, ugly gray, halfway done. Like they were trying to erase the last bit of Margaret that was left. Laura ran her hand over that half-painted door, and something settled in her chest. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was mostly empty now. Rick's people had cleared their things out. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet. And even after everything, even scrubbed and empty, it still felt like home. It still smelled a little like her mother, somehow, in the corners the years couldn't reach. She walked through every room, and in the back of the hall closet, way up on the high shelf, tucked in the dark where the movers must have missed it, she found one last thing. A single cardboard box, water-stained, forgotten. Laura pulled it down with shaking hands and opened it. And inside were her mother's photo albums. The ones she thought were gone forever. The ones she thought were hauled off to the dump. They'd been hiding here the whole time, safe in the walls of the house Margaret loved, waiting for her daughter to come home and find them. Laura sat down right there on the floor and held those albums to her chest, and she cried the good kind of tears. The kind that wash you clean. I have to tell you, of everything in this whole story, that's the moment that stays with me. Because Laura didn't just win a house back. She got her mother back. The photos, the memory, the love, all of it. Diane tried to throw it in the trash. And it survived anyway, just like Laura did. The next weekend, Laura bought a can of paint. The exact same shade her mother used all those years ago. Sky blue. And she painted that door herself, on her hands and knees, a glass of sweet tea sitting on the step beside her, just like Margaret once did. When she was done, she stepped back and looked at it. That perfect blue door, bright and new, catching the afternoon sun. No matter how bad things get, her mother once said, the sky is always still up there. And you know, one of Diane's own relatives asked Laura later why she didn't push for jail time. Why she let Diane settle instead of throwing the book at her. And Laura just smiled a little and said, losing everything she stole, in front of everyone who watched her steal it? That's enough. My mama didn't raise me to become the very thing that hurt me. That was Laura, strong enough to win, and gentle enough not to need revenge past the point of justice. She lives in that little house today. She planted a garden out front, the way her mother used to. And every spring, when the flowers come up and that blue door shines in the sun, she thinks about a dying woman who loved her daughter so much she reached out from beyond the grave to protect her. Margaret couldn't stay, but she made sure. Oh, she made sure. And that little brass key, the one from the birthday card? Laura keeps it on a chain around her neck, right over her heart. where it belongs. So if this story touched you tonight, if Laura and her mama found a soft place in your heart, do me a kindness. Give this video a like, leave a comment, and tell Laura she did her mother proud, and subscribe to stay with us for the next story. Because there's always another one to tell. Thank you for listening. And until next time, hold the ones you love a little closer tonight. You never know how far that love can reach.